The auctioneer's voice cracked through the humid Georgia air like a bullwhip. Next up, lot number 47, German Shepherd, male, age unknown. I stood at the back of the county shelter's makeshift auction yard, not intending to bid on anything. My small farmhouse already housed 2 ornery cats and an arthritic Labrador named Cooper. The February chill cut through my thin jacket as I huddled with 24 other locals, most here for the chickens and farm equipment being liquidated alongside the unwanted animals. Starting bid $1, the auctioneer continued. His enthusiasm noticeably diminished as handlers dragged forward a skeletal German Shepherd. The dog's ears were flattened against his skull, eyes darting wildly across the crowd. A patchwork of scars crisscrossed his dull coat. He moved with a pronounced limp, his back right leg barely touching the ground. Aggressive, not suitable for families. Former owner surrender. The auctioneer rattled off mechanically. $1. Anyone? The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Someone coughed. The dog pressed himself against the handler's legs, trembling visibly now. Might have to put this one down today if there's no interest, the auctioneer said flatly. Last call, $1. Something in the dog's eyes caught mine across the yard. Not aggression, pure terror. I'd seen that look before. On faces in places far from here. My hand went up before my brain could object. Sold for $1 to the lady in the back. The auctioneer called out, relief evident in his voice. Your lucky day, ma'am. Little did I know that dollar would change both our lives forever. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. My name is Jessica Taylor, 34 years old, former combat nurse with the 31st Combat Support Hospital out of Fort Benning. These days, I work as a veterinary assistant at Riverdale Animal Clinic, where the chaos is predictable and nobody's shooting at you. My small farmhouse sits on 3 acres just outside town limits, far enough from neighbors that nobody complains when I wake up screaming at 3 a.m. The military trained me to save lives, but never quite got around to teaching me how to save my own after I came home. I named him Shadow because that's what he was for the first week, a shadow slipping behind furniture whenever I entered a room. The shelter paperwork listed him as unknown German Shepherd mix, approx 5 to 7 years old, with a medical history section that was completely blank except for caution, fear, aggression stamped in angry red letters. Shadow's body told a different story than the paperwork. Military precision had been beaten into that dog, then beaten out again by whatever happened after. His ribs protruded like piano keys beneath a dull coat. A jagged scar ran from his left shoulder down his flank. Puckered and improperly healed, his rear leg dragged slightly, causing a hitch in his step. When I tried to examine his teeth that first night, he growled low in his throat. Not aggression, but warning. We had that in common. At least, my property isn't much a weathered farmhouse with a wraparound porch, a small barn I'd converted to a garage, and a fenced acre where Cooper, my ancient Labrador, spent his days snoozing in sunbeams. 2 rescue cats, Max and Ruby, ruled the interior kingdom with iron paws. None of them seemed particularly thrilled by Shadow's arrival. Riverdale, Georgia, sits 20 miles east of Fort Benning. Small enough that everybody knows everybody's business, but large enough to get lost if you try hard enough. It's the kind of town where the Friday night high school football game is still the main event, where the diner serves the same breakfast special it's been serving since 1976, and where newcomers are viewed with polite suspicion until they've weathered at least 1 hurricane season. I'd chosen it precisely because nobody here knew me before Afghanistan, before the medevac crash, before the nightmares I had no idea that Dollar Auction Dog would force me to become part of this town in ways I'd spent years avoiding. The drive home from the auction was a lesson in patience. Shadow refused to enter my truck at first, cowering and trembling at the sight of the open tailgate. After 20 minutes of gentle coaxing, he finally allowed me to lift him into the cab, where he pressed himself against the passenger door as if hoping to phase through it. Every bump in the road made him flinch. Every passing car caused him to duck his head. By the time we pulled into my gravel driveway, my knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "Home, sweet home," I said. More to fill the silence than anything else, Shadow's amber eyes flickered toward my voice, then away. Those eyes held something I recognized, the 1,000-yard stare. I'd seen it too many times in the combat hospital. The look of someone who's seen too much and can't unsee it. Getting him out of the truck proved easier than getting him in. As soon as I opened the door, he bolted, racing across the yard before I could grab his leash. I froze, certain he'd disappear into the woods behind my property. Instead, he stopped at the edge of my porch, muscles tense, nose working overtime as he took in the unfamiliar territory. "It's okay," I called softly, keeping my distance. "Nobody's going to hurt you here." He looked unconvinced. Cooper, my elderly Labrador, chose that moment to lumber out onto the porch with his signature wheeze-thump gait. Shadow went rigid, a low growl building in his throat. Cooper, half-blind and wholly unimpressed, simply sniffed in Shadow's direction before settling his arthritic body onto his favorite porch cushion. "That's just Cooper," I explained, as if Shadow could understand. "He's harmless, unless you're a biscuit." It took 3 hours to coax Shadow inside the house. The cats, naturally, made themselves scarce. I set up a dog bed in the corner of the living room, placed a bowl of kibble and water nearby, and gave him space. That first evening, he didn't touch the food. He didn't lie on the bed. He simply stood in the corner, watching me with those haunted eyes. The first real challenge came around midnight. February in Georgia can bring unexpected weather, and that night, a thunderstorm rolled in with a vengeance. The first boom of thunder had me sitting upright in bed, heart racing, the sound too similar to distant artillery for my sleeping brain to distinguish. The second boom was accompanied by a crash from downstairs, followed by frantic scratching. I found Shadow trying to dig his way through my living room floor, his nails bloody, his body trembling so violently he could barely stay upright. When I approached, he bared his teeth, eyes wild and unseeing. "Hey! Hey!" I said, keeping my voice even despite my own racing pulse. "You're safe. You're in Riverdale, Georgia. It's just thunder." I repeated the words like a mantra, settling onto the floor a few feet away. As the storm raged on, I talked to him about nothing and everything: the forecast for tomorrow, Cooper's snoring problem, the leaky faucet in the bathroom I kept meaning to fix. Gradually, his panting slowed. The whites of his eyes became less prominent. By dawn, he'd collapsed from exhaustion, his body just close enough to my outstretched legs that I could feel his warmth. In those early morning hours, as rain pattered against the windows and Shadow finally slept, I had a realization this dog hadn't just been abused or neglected. He'd been to war. The next few days established a tentative routine. Shadow refused to eat if I watched him. He would only relieve himself at the farthest corner of the fenced yard. He flinched at sudden movements. Doorbell rings, car engines. The first time I reached out to touch him, he snapped at my hand, then immediately cowered as if expecting a blow in return. Ben Williams, the veterinarian I worked for and one of the few people I considered a friend, agreed to make a house call rather than subject Shadow to the stress of the clinic. even with me holding Shadow's makeshift leash. It took Ben 15 minutes to approach close enough for a cursory examination. "There's a tattoo inside his ear," Ben said, frowning as he shined a penlight toward Shadow's head. "Military-style identification. This wasn't just some pet. Jess, I'd bet my license this dog was trained for service." Ben barely managed to draw blood for tests before Shadow's tolerance ran out. "He's malnourished, probably has parasites, and that leg was badly broken at some point and healed wrong," Ben concluded as he packed up his bag. "But those aren't his biggest problems." "PTSD," I said quietly. Ben nodded, eyes solemn beneath his wire-rimmed glasses, just like his new mom. Before Ben's truck had even disappeared down my driveway, a police cruiser pulled in. Sheriff Thomas Winslow stepped out, his expression somber beneath his department-issue cowboy hat. "Got a complaint about a dangerous dog, Jessica," he said without preamble. "From Ethan Bradley next door. Says you brought home a military attack dog." I faced Sheriff Winslow with what I hoped was a casual expression. "He's a German Shepherd I picked up at the county auction. Hardly an attack dog. He's half-starved and scared of his own shadow." Winslow's weathered face remained impassive. At 50-something, he'd served as Riverdale's sheriff for nearly 2 decades. He wasn't known for being chatty, but he was fair. "Mind if I take a look?" I led him to the side of the house where Shadow had retreated when the police car arrived. The dog stood with his back against the wall, body vibrating with tension. "Easy now," Winslow murmured, correctly reading the situation. He crouched down, making himself smaller. "Bradley claims this dog lunged at his granddaughter when she was riding her bike past your property." "That's impossible," I said firmly. "Shadow hasn't left the fenced yard, and he's been with me every minute. Besides, he's terrified of strangers. He runs away. Not toward them." Winslow studied Shadow for a long moment. "Military dog. Isn't he—" The question caught me off guard. "The vet thinks he might have been. There's a tattoo in his ear." "My brother-in-law trained K-9s at Fort Benning," Winslow said, his voice softening slightly. "Recognized the stance. This dog's seen action." Something in his tone made me realize Winslow wasn't here just on Ethan Bradley's say-so. "Are you going to make me get rid of him?" Winslow stood, knees cracking. "Not today." "But Jessica, this town has rules about dangerous animals. You've got 2 weeks to demonstrate he's not a threat, or I'll have to enforce the ordinance." He handed me a yellow paper. "Town council meetings next Thursday. Bradley's pushing for a vote on banning military dogs within city limits. Thought you should know." After Winslow left, I made my first attempt at specialized training with Shadow. I'd worked with combat veterans struggling with PTSD during my nursing days. The principles weren't so different. Establish safety, build trust, create predictability. I started with food. Instead of just filling his bowl, I sat on the floor near it, a handful of kibble in my palm. "You eat when you're ready," I told him quietly. "No rush." It took 45 minutes, but eventually hunger overcame fear. Shadow inched forward, snatched a piece of kibble, and retreated. We repeated this dance for hours until, finally, he stayed within arm's reach, gingerly eating from my outstretched hand. The breakthrough came 3 days later. I was sitting on the porch swing, reviewing Ben's preliminary blood work for Shadow, when I mindlessly murmured, "Sits." An old command I'd learned from a German doctor in Afghanistan. Shadow's reaction was immediate. His posture straightened, and he sat, eyes forward, awaiting further instruction. "You understand German commands?" I whispered, astonished. I tried another "Platz." Shadow immediately dropped to a down position. Stay. He stood. Fuss. He moved to heel position beside me. Each command triggered an automatic response muscle memory that transcended whatever trauma had brought him to that auction. In that moment, I glimpsed the dog he had been before disciplined, capable, trained for a purpose. That evening, as I was brushing his increasingly shiny coat, my fingers found something buried in the fur at his neck, a small metal tag that had been concealed by matting. The engravings were partly worn away, but I could make out Delta 7 and what looked like a military unit number. The discovery emboldened me. The next day, I called Fort Benning's Public Affairs Office. "I'm inquiring about a military working dog," I explained to the bored-sounding private who answered. "Designation possibly Delta 7, German Shepherd." "Ma'am, I can't release information about MWDs without proper authorization," came the practiced response. "This dog was found abandoned at a county shelter." I pressed. "If he's military property, don't you want him back?" A pause. "What did you say the designation was?" "Delta 7. Another pause. Longer this time. "Hold, please." I was transferred 3 times, finally reaching a Major Harrison, whose clipped tone conveyed annoyance at the interruption. "Ms. Taylor, if you've found government property, you're required to return it immediately." "He's not an it," I snapped. "He's a dog who's been neglected and abandoned after serving his country. I'll send someone to collect the animal tomorrow." Without confirmation of his identity or service record, without explanation of how he ended up at a county auction, I don't think so. "Major." My heart pounded, but I kept my voice steady. "I'm a veteran, too. I know my rights and his rights under the 2016 Military Working Dog Retirement Act." The mention of the act caused a subtle shift in his tone. "What exactly are you looking for?" "Ms. Taylor. His service record, his medical history, the name of his handler, and an explanation for why a trained military dog ended up abandoned. That's classified information." "Then I guess I'll have to ask my congressman why taxpayer dollars are being used to train dogs that end up discarded like trash." I hadn't known I had this kind of fight left in me, but Shadow's presence at my feet gave me courage I'd thought long gone. Major Harrison sighed. "I'll look into it. Don't expect much." The Thursday town council meeting arrived with no word from Fort Benning. I left Shadow secure at home and walked into the Riverdale Municipal Building alone. The meeting room was surprisingly full. Ethan Bradley had apparently been rallying support. Bradley himself sat in the front row, his tall frame and perpetual scowl familiar to anyone who'd lived in Riverdale more than a month. His family had farmed the land adjacent to mine for generations, and his opinion carried weight. The dangerous animal ordinance was third on the agenda. When my name was called, I approached the podium with sweaty palms but steady resolve. 5 council members stared back at me with expressions ranging from boredom to open hostility. "Ms. Taylor." Council President Martina Diaz began. "You're here to contest Mr. Bradley's petition regarding the German Shepherd you recently acquired. Allegedly a trained military attack dog. Please state your case." I took a deep breath. This wasn't just about keeping Shadow anymore. It was about seeing him, really seeing him for what he was. Not broken goods, to be discarded, but a veteran who deserved care and respect. "His name," I said clearly into the microphone, "is Shadow, and before you vote on his fate, there's something you should know about what he did for our country." The town council chamber fell silent as I stood at the podium. 5 pairs of eyes studied me with varying degrees of skepticism. Ethan Bradley sat in the front row, arms crossed over his barrel chest. A man used to getting his way in Riverdale affairs, Behind him sat a handful of his supporters, mostly neighboring farmers, and a few older residents who nodded along whenever Bradley spoke. "Ms. Taylor?" Council President Diaz prompted. "Please proceed." I squared my shoulders. Shadow came to me severely malnourished, injured, and traumatized. The shelter listed him as aggressive, but that's not accurate. What Shadow is suffering from is PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, the same condition that affects many of our veterans returning from combat zones. I pulled out the metal tag I'd found in Shadow's fur. This tag identifies him as Delta 7, a military working dog. While I haven't received official confirmation yet, his training is evident in his response to German commands, his reaction to certain sounds, and his overall demeanor. Shadow isn't dangerous. He's a veteran who's been discarded. Councilman Perkins, a retired hardware store owner with perpetually ruddy cheeks, leaned forward. "Miss Taylor, with all due respect, a dog with military training is inherently dangerous. These animals are taught to attack on command. They're also taught discipline and control," I countered. Shadow responds to commands immediately. He hasn't displayed aggression toward my other animals, or toward me. What he has shown is hypervigilance and fear, classic PTSD symptoms. Bradley chose that moment to stand. "Excuse me, but my granddaughter was nearly attacked by this dog. Are we waiting until someone actually gets hurt?" "Mr. Bradley," I said, turning to face him directly. "Shadow has not left my fenced property since I brought him home. If your granddaughter was riding past my house, there's no way Shadow could have lunged at her. Are you calling my granddaughter a liar?" Bradley's face reddened. "I'm saying there's been a misunderstanding," I replied evenly. "And I'd like the chance to work with Shadow before this council makes a decision that condemns him for crimes he hasn't committed." Council President Diaz cleared her throat. "Ms. Taylor, I understand your passion, but the safety of our citizens must come first. Do you have any professional qualifications in handling traumatized animals?" I took a deep breath. I was a combat nurse with the 31st Combat Support Hospital. I treated soldiers with PTSD. The principles aren't that different. And I'm working with Dr. Benjamin Williams from Riverdale Animal Clinic, who's overseeing Shadow's physical recovery. From the back of the room, a voice spoke up. "I'd like to say something, if I may." Ben Williams had slipped in during my testimony, still wearing his scrubs from the clinic. He approached the podium, nodding respectfully to the council. "I've examined this dog twice now," Ben stated. "While he does show signs of past trauma, he displays no unprovoked aggression. What he needs is rehabilitation, not euthanasia. Ms. Taylor is uniquely qualified to provide that care, given her background." Bradley scoffed audibly. "So we're supposed to wait until someone gets hurt?" "Actually," Ben continued, "I've brought some information that might be relevant." He handed a folder to the council clerk. "This contains medical literature on canine PTSD and rehabilitation protocols. Also included is a proposed safety plan, secure fencing, muzzle use in public, ongoing professional assessment." Council President Diaz scanned the contents, then passed the folder to the other members. "Miss Taylor, would you be willing to adhere to these safety measures?" "Absolutely," I said without hesitation. "Shadow deserves a chance to heal." After a brief deliberation, the council reached a compromise. I would have 30 days to work with Shadow under Ben's supervision. At the end of that period, an independent evaluator would assess Shadow's temperament and determine whether he could remain in Riverdale. As the meeting adjourned, Bradley brushed past me. "This isn't over," he muttered. "That dog is dangerous, and everyone in this town is going to know it." The following weeks became a carefully orchestrated routine. Each morning began with breakfast training, Shadow learning that food came from me, that mealtimes were predictable and safe. We worked on basic commands first, building confidence with tasks he could easily accomplish. Then we progressed to more complex behaviors, always rewarding success, never punishing failure. Shadow's physical condition improved steadily. His coat developed a healthy shine. Muscles filled out his once gaunt frame, and though his limp remained, it became less pronounced. The haunted look in his eyes began to fade, replaced by something I might cautiously call interest. The first major breakthrough came on a rain-soaked Tuesday. 2 weeks after the council meeting, I was sitting on the porch, laptop open as I scrolled through yet another unhelpful forum about military working dogs. Shadow had been dozing nearby, but a car backfiring in the distance sent him scrambling under the porch swing. I continued reading, pretending not to notice his distress, sometimes acknowledging his fear only heightened it. After several minutes, I felt a tentative touch against my ankle. Looking down, I found Shadow's muzzle resting lightly on my foot. His eyes met mine briefly before darting away, but he remained connected to me. It was the first time he'd initiated contact. That same night, I emailed every military contact I'd maintained from my service days, former colleagues, supervisors, even patients. I'd stayed in touch with anyone who might have connections to the K9 units. I attached photos of Shadow and his identification tag, along with my contact information and a brief explanation of the situation. Most responses were sympathetic but unhelpful. Then, 3 days later, I received a message from Lieutenant Sofia Rodriguez, whom I'd treated for shrapnel wounds in 2018. "Your dog's tag format matches specialized units deployed to forward operating bases in Afghanistan between 2016 to 2020, she wrote. "I've forwarded your info to someone who might know more. No promises." The next day, my phone rang with an unknown number. Jessica Taylor. The male voice was crisp, professional, speaking. "This is Captain James Nelson, formerly with the 5th Special Forces Group. Lieutenant Rodriguez shared your inquiry about a military working dog designated Delta 7. My heart raced. "Yes, I've been trying to trace his history. I can't discuss specifics over an unsecured line," Nelson said carefully, "but I can tell you Delta 7 was part of a specialized detection unit deployed to Kandahar province. His handler was Staff Sergeant Marcus Cooper. They were separated after an incident in late 2020. That's all I can say officially. Do you know how he ended up at a civilian auction, or how to contact Sergeant Cooper?" A pause. "Cooper was medically discharged. As for the dog, there were budget cuts. Some MWDs were reclassified as equipment surplus rather than processed through proper retirement channels. It wasn't right, but it happened. Equipment surplus. The term made my blood boil. These are living beings who served their country." Preaching to the choir. "Ma'am, look. Cooper went off-grid after his discharge. Last I heard, he was somewhere in the Appalachians. But if you're serious about helping Delta 7, there's someone you should meet. Jake Thornton runs a rehabilitation program for former military dogs about an hour south of Riverdale. I'll text you his information." Jake Thornton's rehabilitation program turned out to be a sprawling 40-acre property outside of Columbus, Georgia. The sign at the entrance read, "Second Chance K9, where veterans help veterans." Jake himself was a barrel-chested former Marine with a prosthetic leg and a no-nonsense attitude. "So, you've got Delta 7, he said after I'd explained my situation. We stood watching Shadow explore the fenced training yard, keeping a respectful distance from the 3 other German shepherds already present. I remember hearing about him. Impressive detection record. Detection of what? Jake shrugged. IEDs. Primarily, some units also train their dogs for weapons caches, enemy combatants, that sort of thing. He studied Shadow with an expert's eye. He's looking better than I expected, given what you've told me. What exactly happened to him? I asked. How does a highly trained military dog end up abandoned at a county auction? Jake's expression darkened. Budget cuts are the official answer. The unofficial one is messier. Some handlers try to adopt their partners after discharge, but the process is complicated, especially if the dog has been classified for further service. Sometimes dogs develop issues that make them unsuitable for continued deployment. PTSD, physical limitations, age. Then they fall through the cracks. That's not right, I said, watching Shadow cautiously approach one of the other shepherds. They deserve better. Which is why I started this place. Jake replied. Look, I can help you with Shadow's rehabilitation. We've got specialized training protocols for dogs with combat experience. But fair warning, recovery isn't linear. There will be setbacks. Over the next few weeks, Shadow and I became regular visitors to Second Chance K9. Jake taught me techniques specifically designed for military dogs, how to redirect hypervigilance into focused tasks, how to desensitize trigger reactions, how to rebuild trust through predictable routines. At home, Shadow began to show signs of his former self. The first time he brought me his leash, dropping it at my feet with expectant eyes. I nearly cried. When he barked at a delivery truck, a normal dog behavior rather than a trauma response, I celebrated with extra treats and praise. Meanwhile, my search for Marcus Cooper continued. Jake had put out feelers among his veteran network, but Cooper remained elusive. Some guys don't want to be found, Jake explained. After what they've seen, what they've done, sometimes disappearing feels like the only option. I understood that impulse all too well. Social media provided my next lead. I'd created a page titled Finding Shadow's Handler, with photos of Shadow and his tag. Along with what little information I had about his service, the page gained modest traction among military support groups, eventually reaching over 2,000 followers. 3 weeks after creating the page, I received a message from a woman named Claire Bennett. I think your dog served with my brother's unit in Afghanistan. Marcus never talks about his time overseas, but I recognize the unit number on the tag. He lost his dog during his last deployment and hasn't been the same since. Claire couldn't provide direct contact information. Apparently, Marcus had insisted on isolation after his discharge, but she promised to mention Shadow during her monthly call with her brother. It wasn't much, but it was the closest connection I'd found so far. As Shadow's evaluation date approached, even Ben commented on his transformation. If I didn't know his history, I'd never guess what this dog has been through, he said during Shadow's checkup. You've done amazing work with him, Jess. Not everyone shared Ben's assessment. Whispers spread through Riverdale, exaggerated stories about Shadow's military background, rumors that he'd been trained to kill, warnings to keep children away from my property. I found a crude sign nailed to my fence one morning, "Dangerous dog, enter at your own risk." Ethan Bradley's influence. No doubt. The situation came to a head the weekend before Shadow's evaluation. I was working in the garden, Shadow napping in a patch of sunlight nearby. When the sound of children's voices approached along the road, Shadow's ears perked up. But he remained calm, his eyes tracking the movement without alarm progress from his earlier reactions to strangers. Two girls on bicycles pedaled past my property. One I recognized as Bradley's granddaughter, Emily. They slowed as they approached, Emily pointing toward Shadow and whispering to her friend. Then, to my horror, her friend picked up a rock and hurled it over my fence. The rock struck Shadow's flank. He yelped, startled and confused rather than aggressive. Before I could intervene, the girls threw more rocks, laughing as Shadow scrambled to hide behind the garden shed. "Hey!" I shouted, dropping my trowel and running toward the fence. "Stop that right now!" The girls sped away on their bikes, but not before I clearly saw Emily's satisfied expression. My hands trembled with anger as I hurried to Shadow, who was trembling behind the shed, eyes wide with confusion. This wasn't the reaction of a dangerous animal. It was the response of a being who couldn't understand why he was being hurt. That evening, I marched over to the Bradley farm, determined to confront Ethan about his granddaughter's behavior. I found him on his front porch, nursing a glass of iced tea. His wife, Margaret, answered the door, her perpetually anxious expression deepening when she saw me. "Ethan," she called. "It's Jessica Taylor." Bradley appeared in the doorway, scowling. "What do you want?" "I want to know why your granddaughter thinks it's acceptable to throw rocks at an animal," I said, struggling to keep my voice level. "What are you talking about?" "Emily and her friend were throwing rocks at Shadow today. He was inside my fence, minding his own business." Bradley's expression hardened. "My granddaughter wouldn't do that. And even if she did, which I'm not saying happened, maybe she was just protecting herself from that dangerous animal you insist on keeping. Shadow was behind a 6-foot fence, not bothering anyone," I countered. "There was no threat to justify what they did." "Listen," Bradley said, stepping onto the porch. "Everyone knows what that dog is, a killer trained by the military. It doesn't belong in a residential area. Period. He's a veteran who served his country," I replied, my temper rising. "Just like many people in this town, including me. He deserves respect, not persecution." "You're equating a dog to our servicemen." Bradley's face reddened. "That's insulting to every person who's worn the uniform." Something snapped inside me. That dog saved more American lives than you can count. "Mr. Bradley, while you were sitting comfortably on this porch, Shadow was out there detecting IEDs and preventing ambushes. He came home broken because of what he gave to this country. And instead of honoring that service, you're teaching children to torment him. So tell me which one of you is really the dangerous one here." I turned to leave, but Bradley called after me. "Your evaluation is in 3 days. Ms. Taylor, we'll see who the town believes a newcomer with a killer dog, or a family that's lived here for generations." As I walked back home, my confrontation with Bradley replayed in my mind. I'd let my emotions get the better of me, potentially making things worse for Shadow. But deeper than that concern was a realization somewhere along the way. Shadow's fight had become my own, his struggle to overcome trauma, to find purpose again, to be seen for who he truly was, rather than what fear painted him to be. It mirrored my own journey since returning from Afghanistan. Back at the house, I found Shadow waiting patiently by the door. When I sat on the porch steps, emotionally drained, he settled beside me, his warm presence a silent comfort. For the first time since bringing him home, he placed his head in my lap, amber eyes looking up at me with what I could only describe as trust. "We'll figure this out," I promised, gently stroking his ears. "Whatever happens, We'll face it together. What I didn't know then was that fate was about to throw us both a curveball that would change everything. The day before Shadow's evaluation, the skies opened up, rain hammered against the roof, turning my dirt driveway into a muddy river. I spent the morning reviewing the evaluation criteria for the 10th time, highlighting sections that showcased Shadow's progress. The independent evaluator would be looking for any signs of aggression, testing Shadow's responses to various stimuli, loud noises, sudden movements, strangers approaching. We'd practiced these scenarios extensively at Jake's facility, but controlled training was different from a formal assessment. Around noon, my phone pinged with a severe weather alert flash flood warnings for Riverdale County. I glanced out the window at the swollen creek that bordered the east side of my property. Normally a gentle trickle, now transformed into a churning brown torrent. Shadow paced restlessly by the door, sensing my unease. "It's just rain," I told him, scratching behind his ears. "We're safe here." As if to contradict me, my phone rang. It was Sheriff Winslow. "Jessica, we've got trouble on Russell Road. Creek's risen past flood stage, and we're evacuating the lower sections. Your place is on higher ground, but you might want to prepare just in case. Thanks for the heads up. Is there anything I can do to help?" A pause. "Actually, yes. The county shelter's at capacity. We're setting up an emergency center at the high school gym. They could use someone with medical training." I glanced at Shadow. Leaving him alone during a storm was a risk his anxiety might trigger a regression, but people needed help. "I'll be there as soon as I can," I promised. "But I need to bring Shadow. He can't stay here alone during this." Winslow hesitated. "That might complicate things. Bradley's involved with the evacuation committee." "Shadow will be muzzled and leashed," I assured him. "And he might actually be useful. He's got excellent senses." "Your call," Winslow said finally. "But be prepared for pushback." An hour later, Shadow and I arrived at Riverdale High School. The parking lot was filled with emergency vehicles, volunteers unloading supplies, and dazed-looking residents clutching hastily packed bags. Shadow pressed against my leg, overwhelmed by the chaos, but staying focused on me, a testament to how far he'd come. Inside the gymnasium, cots had been arranged in neat rows. A makeshift medical station was set up in one corner. Staffed by a harried-looking school nurse and a retired doctor I recognized from church, I approached them, introducing myself and offering assistance. They welcomed the help immediately, too busy to question Shadow's presence. For the next few hours, I treated minor injuries, cuts from clearing debris, a sprained ankle, an elderly man with concerning blood pressure. Shadow remained by my side, surprisingly calm amid the commotion. Several children even asked to pet him, which I allowed under careful supervision. Each positive interaction was another piece of evidence for tomorrow's evaluation. The atmosphere in the gym shifted when Ethan Bradley entered with a group of volunteers carrying food donations from local farms. His eyes locked on Shadow and then on me. His expression darkening, he marched directly to Sheriff Winslow. Gesturing emphatically in our direction, Winslow approached me while I was bandaging a young woman's cut hand. "Jessica," he said quietly, "we might have a situation brewing. Bradley's demanding the dog be removed." "We're not causing any problems," I replied, keeping my voice low. "Shadow's helping people feel calmer. Look around." Indeed, several evacuees had commented on Shadow's gentle presence. An autistic teenager had even spent the last half hour sitting quietly beside him, stroking his fur with repetitive motions that seemed to soothe them both. Winslow nodded slowly. "I see that, but Bradley's riled up the evacuation committee, says the dog's presence is causing distress. Before I could respond, commotion erupted near the gym entrance. A woman burst in, soaking wet and frantic. "My daughter," she cried. "I can't find Emily. She was right behind me when the water came up. But now she's gone." Emily Bradley, Ethan's granddaughter, the same girl who had thrown rocks at Shadow. Ethan rushed to the woman, his daughter-in-law. I realized, "What do you mean? Gone? Where's Daniel?" Daniel Bradley was Ethan's son, Emily's father. "He's searching along the creek," the woman sobbed. "The water rose so fast. 1 minute the road was clear. The next it was underwater. Emily was scared and ran toward the woods. Daniel went after her. Told me to get to safety." The gym erupted into action. Winslow organized search teams, assigning areas along the creek and the forest edge. Volunteers grabbed flashlights and rain gear. Preparing to brave the storm, I approached Winslow. "Sheriff, I'd like to help. Shadow is trained for detection. He might be able to find her." Ethan whirled toward me. "Keep that dog away from my granddaughter." Winslow held up a hand. "Ethan, let's use every resource we have. Time is critical." He turned to me. "Do you need anything for him to track her scent?" "Something she's worn recently would help." Emily's mother produced a small backpack. "She had this with her. It has her sweater inside." I knelt beside Shadow, who was already alert to the tension in the room. I opened the backpack, removing a child's pink sweater. "Shadow, find," I said clearly, holding the garment to his nose. Something remarkable happened then. Shadow's demeanor transformed completely. The nervous, traumatized dog disappeared, replaced by the military working dog he'd once been. His posture straightened, eyes focused, movements becoming precise and purposeful. He sniffed the sweater thoroughly, then looked up at me with an intensity I hadn't seen before, not afraid, not aggressive, but ready, waiting for command. He needs to be off-leash to track effectively, I told Winslow. "But he'll respond to my commands?" Winslow nodded. "You two take the eastern edge of the creek, where it borders the state forest. Radio, if you find anything." As we headed out into the storm, Ethan called after us. "If anything happens to Emily because of that dog..." I didn't hear the rest. Already moving through the rain with Shadow leading the way, the eastern creek path was a nightmare of mud and debris. Rain continued to pound down, reducing visibility to mere feet. The creek itself had become a raging river, overflowing its banks and transforming familiar landmarks into an alien landscape. Shadow moved with surprising confidence, nose working overtime as he zigzagged through the underbrush. 20 minutes into our search, Shadow suddenly froze, then changed direction, heading deeper into the forest. I followed, trusting his instincts more than my own in these conditions. The terrain grew steeper, the ground slicker with each step. Shadow's pace quickened, his body language signaling increased intensity. Then I heard it, a faint cry, barely audible over the storm. "Help somebody!" Not a child's voice, a man's. Shadow broke into a run, with me struggling to keep pace. We crested a small rise, and I saw them Daniel Bradley pinned beneath a fallen tree, and beside him, a terrified Emily, trying desperately to pull her father free. They were on a narrow ledge above the creek, which had become a churning death trap below them. The ground around them was visibly eroding with each passing minute. Emily saw us first. Her eyes widened in terror at the sight of Shadow. "The killer dog!" she screamed, pressing herself against her father. "Emily, he's here to help," I called, approaching slowly. We've been looking for you." Daniel Bradley looked up, his face tight with pain. "My leg's trapped. I can't move. The ledge is giving way." I assessed the situation quickly. The tree was too heavy for me to lift alone. Daniel was losing blood from a gash on his leg. The ground beneath them was literally washing away. We had minutes, not hours. I grabbed my radio. Found them. East Creek Path. About half a mile in. "Man down. Trapped under a tree. Need immediate assistance. Situation critical, ground unstable." "Copy that." Winslow's voice crackled back. "Teams redirecting to your location. ETA 15 minutes. Too long. The ledge wouldn't hold that long." I approached carefully, testing the ground with each step. "Emily, I need you to come to me. It's not safe where you are." The girl shook her head violently, clinging to her father. "No, the dog will hurt me." "Shadow won't hurt you," I promised. "He's here to save you, just like he saved soldiers overseas." Daniel looked from me to his daughter. "Emily, go with her, please, sweetheart." Emily hesitated, looking at Shadow with undisguised fear. I made a split-second decision. "Shadow, Platz," I commanded. Immediately, Shadow dropped to a down position, head on his paws, making himself as small and non-threatening as possible. "See, he listens. He's a good dog. Emily, a hero dog, and right now, he wants to be your hero." Something in my words reached her, slowly. Emily edged toward me, giving Shadow a wide berth. When she was close enough, I pulled her to safety, checking her quickly for injuries. Besides being cold and frightened, she seemed unharmed. "Now we help your dad," I told her. "But I need Shadow's help, and I need you to be brave. Can you do that?" Emily nodded uncertainly. I assessed the fallen tree again. It wasn't enormous, but the position made it impossible for Daniel to leverage himself free. With Shadow's help, we might be able to move it just enough. "Shadow, higher," I called. Shadow approached, alert and ready. "Emily, I need you to hold my radio and tell me if anyone calls." "Okay. This is a very important job." With Emily occupied, I positioned myself at one end of the tree while directing Shadow to the other end. "Shadow, fast," I commanded. Shadow gripped the branch with his powerful jaws. "On 3, I told Daniel. "Try to pull yourself free when we lift. 1, 2, 3. Shadow and I strained against the weight for a heart-stopping moment. Nothing happened. Then the tree shifted just inches. But enough. Daniel dragged himself free with a cry of pain. His leg bent at an unnatural angle. The ground beneath us gave an ominous shudder. The ledge was collapsing. "We need to move. Now." I grabbed Emily with one arm while helping Daniel stand with the other. "Shadow, voraus." Shadow moved ahead, leading the way as we half-dragged, half-carried Daniel back toward solid ground. We had barely cleared the area when the ledge gave way completely, crashing into the raging creek below. Emily screamed, burying her face against my side. Even Shadow whined, pressing against my leg. "We're okay," I reassured them, though my own heart was pounding. "We're safe now." Daniel collapsed against a tree trunk, his face gray with pain. I made a quick tourniquet from my belt to slow the bleeding from his leg, then radioed our new position to the search teams. While we waited, Emily approached Shadow cautiously. "He really helped save Daddy?" "He did," I confirmed. "That's what he was trained to do, save people." She reached out a tentative hand, then pulled back. "I'm sorry I threw rocks at him." "I think he'd forgive you if you asked him," I said gently. Emily knelt beside Shadow, who remained perfectly still, as if understanding the importance of this moment. "I'm sorry, Shadow," she whispered. "You're not a killer dog. You're a hero dog." As if in response, Shadow gently licked her hand. By the time the rescue team reached us, Emily had fallen asleep against Shadow's side, exhausted from her ordeal. The sight of Ethan Bradley's face when he saw his granddaughter curled up next to the dog he'd been trying to banish was something I'll never forget. A complex mixture of relief, confusion, and the beginning of something that might eventually become understanding. As they loaded Daniel onto a stretcher, Ethan approached me for a long moment. He simply stood there, struggling with words. Finally, he extended his hand. "Thank you," he said gruffly. "Both of you." Shadow's evaluation the next day was something of an anticlimax. News of his role in the rescue had spread throughout Riverdale. When the independent evaluator arrived at my property, she was met by an unexpected welcoming committee: Sheriff Winslow, Dr. Williams, Jake Thornton, and, most surprisingly, Ethan and Emily Bradley. "I believe we have some character witnesses," Winslow explained with a rare smile. As Shadow demonstrated his training, his obedience, his gentle nature, I realized something profound had changed. Shadow wasn't just being evaluated. He was being seen, truly seen, for the first time since coming to Riverdale. Not as a threat, not as damaged goods, but as what he truly was: a hero who'd found his way home. What none of us knew was that this was just the beginning of Shadow's story. The real test and the greatest revelation was yet to come. Shadow's evaluation passed without incident. The independent assessor, a retired K-9 handler from the Atlanta Police Department, declared him well-adjusted, considering his history, and no threat to public safety under proper handling. The town council voted unanimously to allow Shadow to remain in Riverdale, provided I maintained his training and kept him leashed in public areas. For a brief, beautiful moment, everything seemed settled. Shadow had a home, I had a purpose, and even Ethan Bradley had begrudgingly accepted our presence in the community. Emily visited regularly, shyly at first, then with growing confidence as Shadow greeted her with gentle enthusiasm each time. But if life in a war zone had taught me anything, it was that moments of peace are often just the calm before the next storm. The first sign of trouble came 3 weeks after the flood. I was working at the clinic when Ben received a call from Fort Benning's legal department. He handed me the phone, his expression guarded. "Ms. Taylor, this is Major Patricia Jenkins, Judge Advocate General's office. I understand you're in possession of military property designated Delta 7. My grip tightened on the receiver. "His name is Shadow, and he's a retired military working dog who was abandoned by the system that should have protected him. There seems to have been an administrative error," Jenkins replied, her tone professionally neutral. "According to our records, MWD Delta 7 was scheduled for reassignment, not retirement. The Department of Defense is requesting his immediate return." "Return," I repeated incredulously. "He was sold at a county auction for $1. He was half-starved and traumatized. And now, suddenly, the military wants him back." "I understand your concerns, Ms. Taylor, but I'm afraid this isn't a request. Delta 7 remains government property. A team will arrive tomorrow to retrieve him." The world tilted sideways. He saved a child's life during the flood. He's finally healing. You can't just take him. I sympathize, but my hands are tied. I suggest you cooperate fully to avoid potential legal consequences. I hung up, my mind racing. Ben listened as I relayed the conversation, his normally calm demeanor giving way to indignation. "That's outrageous," he said. "After everything he's been through, after they abandoned him. They can't do this." I insisted, though a sinking feeling in my stomach suggested otherwise. Military bureaucracy was a familiar adversary from my nursing days, impersonal, implacable, impossible to reason with. Ben's expression turned thoughtful. "The timing is interesting. Don't you think Shadow makes headlines for heroism? And suddenly the military remembers he exists." He was right. The Riverdale Gazette had run a front-page story about Shadow's rescue efforts during the flood. The piece had been picked up by larger papers in Columbus and Atlanta, complete with photos of Shadow and mentions of his military background. They're embarrassed. I realized. A discarded military dog becomes a local hero, raising questions about how he ended up at auction in the first place. "Exactly," Ben agreed. "This isn't about needing Shadow back. It's about damage control."
Bear.
That evening, I sat on my porch steps, watching Shadow explore the yard with the curiosity he'd developed since feeling secure in his home. The thought of returning him to the system that had broken him was unbearable, but fighting the United States military seemed equally impossible. I called Jake Thornton, hoping his connections might offer some insight. "They can't legally take him," Jake said after I explained the situation. "The 2016 Military Working Dog Retirement Act was specifically designed to prevent this kind of thing, but you'll need to prove he was officially retired, not just missing or reassigned. How do I do that without his service record? That's the catch. Without documentation. It's your word against theirs." Jake paused. "There's something else you should know. I've been hearing rumors about a private military contractor taking over parts of the K-9 training program, cutting corners, pushing dogs too hard. If Shadow was transferred to them after his regular service..." The implication hung in the air between us. If Shadow had been subjected to improper handling or training after his legitimate military service, it would explain both his condition and the military's sudden interest in reclaiming him. "I need to find Marcus Cooper," I said, the path forward suddenly clear. He'd know what happened after they were separated. "I've been asking around," Jake admitted. "Nothing solid yet. But there's a guy in North Carolina who might know something, ex-handler who served with Cooper. I'll text you his details." I spent the night researching military regulations and preparing for the team's arrival. Shadow seemed to sense my anxiety, staying closer than usual, his amber eyes tracking my movements with concern. I wondered how much he understood about what was happening, whether some part of him feared returning to whatever had broken his spirit before. The military team arrived precisely at 9 a.m. the following day, a stern-faced lieutenant and 2 soldiers in an official vehicle. Sheriff Winslow had insisted on being present. Standing beside me on the porch, as the lieutenant approached with a clipboard of paperwork. "Jessica Taylor, I'm Lieutenant Harrington. We're here to retrieve MWD Delta 7. His name is Shadow," I said firmly, "and I'd like to see documentation proving he wasn't properly retired before being sold at auction." The lieutenant's expression tightened. "Miss Taylor, I have orders signed by Colonel James Richardson authorizing the repossession of military property. I don't need to provide you with anything." Winslow stepped forward. "Actually, Lieutenant, you do. County records show this dog was legally purchased at public auction. If you're claiming he was government property wrongfully sold, you'll need to provide evidence of that claim." "Sheriff, this is a military matter." "In my jurisdiction," Winslow interrupted mildly, "where civilian law applies. Now, do you have documentation proving this dog wasn't legally retired?" The lieutenant's jaw worked silently for a moment. "I can have the paperwork sent from Fort Benning." "Excellent." Winslow nodded. "When it arrives, we can revisit this conversation. Until then, Shadow remains with Ms. Taylor." After a tense standoff, the military team departed with a warning that they would return. As their vehicle disappeared down the driveway, I turned to Winslow in shock. "Thank you," he shrugged. "It's just procedure, but they'll be back. Jessica, with paperwork, you need to find evidence that Shadow was officially retired or abandoned." That afternoon, a rock shattered my kitchen window. Attached was a note, "Military dogs kill. Get out while you can." Not Ethan Bradley's style. He'd become cautiously supportive since the flood. This was something else, something uglier. I reported the incident to Winslow, who promised to increase patrols past my property. That night, I was awakened by Shadow's low growl. Someone was moving around outside my house. I called 911, then carefully made my way downstairs. Shadow at my heel, his body tense with alertness but not panic. Through the living room window, I caught a glimpse of shadowy figures near my barn. Before I could process what was happening, flames erupted, orange and vicious against the night sky. My barn was on fire. Shadow and I rushed outside as Winslow's patrol car screeched into the driveway, followed closely by the volunteer fire department. The barn was already engulfed. Impossible to save. We focused on preventing the fire from spreading to the house. As dawn broke over the smoldering remains, Winslow approached with a grim expression. "This was deliberate. Jessica, accelerant used. Signs of forced entry. Who would do this? Could be local troublemakers. Could be someone who doesn't want you keeping that dog." He hesitated. "Or it could be related to your search for Shadow's handler. You've been asking a lot of questions. Maybe someone doesn't like that." The implications chilled me. If finding Marcus Cooper meant uncovering something beyond simple neglect, something criminal involving military dogs, then Shadow wasn't just a discarded veteran. He was evidence. Later that day, while Shadow and I were staying at Ben's house as a precaution, I received a text from Claire Bennett, Marcus Cooper's sister. "Marcus saw the news about Shadow. He's ready to talk. Can you come to Blue Ridge tomorrow? Just you and the dog." As I packed a bag for our journey to the North Carolina mountains, Ben voiced the concern I'd been avoiding. "What if it's a trap? Jess, what if whoever torched your barn is using Cooper's sister to lure you somewhere isolated?" The thought had occurred to me. But Shadow's future, perhaps his very life, depended on finding the truth about his service. And only one man could provide that truth. "I'll be careful," I promised. "But we have to go. Shadow deserves to know what happened to him, and so do I." What awaited us in the mountains would prove more devastating than anything I could have imagined: a conspiracy of silence, a betrayal of duty, and the darkest chapter of Shadow's past. The Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina loomed before us, misty and mysterious as I navigated the winding roads in my old pickup. Shadow sat in the passenger seat, unusually alert, his ears perking forward whenever we climbed higher into the wilderness. I wondered if some animal instinct told him we were approaching something important, or someone important. Claire Bennett's directions led us to a gravel road barely visible from the highway. Unmarked except for a weathered mailbox with no name, I followed the narrow path for nearly 2 miles, dense forest pressing in from both sides, until it opened into a small clearing. A modest cabin stood in the center, smoke curling from its chimney despite the mild spring weather. As I parked, the cabin door opened. A woman stepped onto the porch, mid-30s, her resemblance to the woman in Claire's profile picture confirming her identity. She watched warily as I exited the truck. Then her attention shifted to Shadow. Her hand flew to her mouth. "Oh my God," she whispered. "It really is him." Before I could respond, a man appeared in the doorway behind her, tall and lean, with a beard that couldn't hide the scar running along his left jawline. His eyes, the same piercing blue as Claire's, widened at the sight of Shadow, who had gone completely still beside me. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Then Shadow broke free from my side, bounding toward the porch with a high-pitched whine I'd never heard him make before. The man staggered forward as if pulled by an invisible force, dropping to his knees just as Shadow reached him. "Delta," he choked out, burying his face in Shadow's fur. "I thought you were dead. I thought you were dead." Staff Sergeant Marcus Cooper, for that's who he was, clung to Shadow as the dog whimpered and licked his face, tail whipping back and forth with such force it seemed in danger of detaching. I stood rooted in place, witnessing a reunion so raw and powerful that tears sprang to my eyes. Claire approached me quietly. "He hasn't spoken more than 10 words at a time since he got back," she murmured. "Not until he saw your story in the paper. Then he called me for the first time in months. Eventually, Marcus gathered himself enough to look up at me. 'You saved him,' he said, voice rough with emotion, 'when nobody else would.'" We moved inside the cabin, a sparse but comfortable space centered around a stone fireplace. Shadow refused to leave Marcus's side, pressing against his leg as if afraid he might disappear again. I explained everything finding Shadow at the auction, nursing him back to health, the flood rescue, and now the military's sudden interest in reclaiming him. Marcus listened silently, his expression darkening with each new detail. When I finished, he stared into the fire for a long moment. "They told me he was killed in action," he finally said. "After the ambush, said he ran into the firefight and didn't make it out." "What ambush?" I asked gently. Marcus's hands tightened around his coffee mug. "Our last mission, Kandahar Province, November 2020. Intelligence said the area was clear, but it was a setup. We walked right into it." He drew a shaky breath. "Delta Shadow, he knew, started acting strange about a kilometer before the designated search zone. I reported it, but the lieutenant said to proceed anyway." Shadow leaned more heavily against Marcus, as if lending strength for the difficult story. "We were pinned down for 6 hours. Shadow kept us alive. He detected a flanking maneuver, gave us just enough warning to reposition. I took shrapnel in my leg and shoulder. Shadow got hit too, but he kept working." Marcus's voice cracked. "When medevac finally arrived, they separated us. Standard procedure during medical evacuations. That was the last time I saw him. Until today," Claire added softly. Marcus nodded. "I was shipped back to Germany, then to Walter Reed, in and out of surgeries for months. Every time I asked about Delta, I got the runaround. Finally, an officer told me he'd been killed in a secondary explosion after I was evacuated. I believed them." "Why would they lie about that?" I asked. Marcus's expression hardened. "Because after 5 deployments, Delta and I had become inconvenient." "What do you mean?" "We knew too much, saw too much." He hesitated, glancing at his sister. Claire squeezed his shoulder. "It's okay. Marcus, she needs to know." Marcus stood abruptly. Moving to a wooden trunk in the corner, he returned with a weathered journal and a small metal box. "Our unit wasn't just detecting IEDs. We were being sent in to verify intelligence before drone strikes. Standard procedure requires visual confirmation of targets before engagement. Delta and I were part of that verification team." He flipped open the journal, revealing pages of handwritten notes. "We were good at our job, too good, 3 times in our last deployment. We found civilian compounds misidentified as enemy positions 3 times. I called off strikes that would have killed innocent people. The third time, our commander was furious, said we were undermining the mission. 2 weeks later, we walked into that ambush. Claire added, her voice tight with anger, with faulty intelligence that Marcus had specifically questioned. You think it was deliberate? The implication was horrifying. I don't know, Marcus admitted, but after I was evacuated, they erased Delta from the record, made it easy to transfer him to a private contractor working on a new enhanced deterrence program. He opened the metal box, removing a flash drive. A buddy in intelligence sent me this before he was reassigned. It's heavily redacted, but it contains transfer orders for 5 military working dogs, including Delta. They were sent to a facility run by Cerberus Security Solutions. My blood ran cold. The military is contracting out its dog training. Some aspects of it, especially for specialized roles that fall into gray areas. He met my eyes directly. Plausible deniability. If these dogs were used for operations outside standard rules of engagement, the military could claim ignorance. That's why they want Shadow back, I realized. Not because he's valuable to them, but because he's evidence of the program, and because of what he might reveal about our last mission. Marcus added quietly, military working dogs are never just equipment. They're witnesses. Delta saw everything that happened that day. Who gave the orders? Who was where? If questions ever get asked about that ambush, he'd be a living connection to it. Claire leaned forward. When we saw the article about Shadow saving that little girl, Marcus recognized him immediately, but we were afraid to contact you directly. If they're willing to burn down your barn to scare you off, they're monitoring your communications, I concluded, a chill running through me. Marcus nodded grimly. Claire used a burner phone to text you. We've been careful. I processed this information, stroking Shadow's head as he rested between us. So, what do we do now? The military will be back with paperwork, probably within days. I kept copies of everything, Marcus said. Delta's service record, his medals, the retirement papers I filed before our last deployment paperwork that mysteriously disappeared after I was injured. It won't be enough to fight the entire military, but it might be enough to create doubt, enough to get media attention. And I've been in contact with Watchdog, Claire added. It's a non-profit that advocates for military working dogs. They've been documenting cases like Shadow's service dogs abandoned or mishandled after deployment. They're building a class action case. Marcus's expression softened as he looked at Shadow. I tried to find him after my discharge. When I could finally move around again, I called every military kennel, every adoption program. Nobody had records of him. It was like he never existed. But he did exist, I said firmly. He does exist. And so do you. Your testimony about what happened, combined with Shadow's reappearance and medical evidence of his condition, could expose whatever this program is. It would be my word against the military's, Marcus said bitterly. A damaged veteran with PTSD versus the Department of Defense. Who do you think people will believe? Not just your word, I corrected. Your evidence, Shadow's condition, the paper trail of his mysterious disappearance and reappearance at a county auction, and you won't be alone. I pulled out my phone, showing him the growing Facebook group dedicated to Shadow's story. Thousands of supporters, including veterans, dog handlers, and ordinary citizens outraged by his treatment. People care about this, Marcus. They care about him, and they'll care about what happened to both of you. For the first time, a flicker of hope crossed Marcus's face. It won't be easy. The military protects its secrets. So do we, I replied, placing my hand on Shadow's back. He protected you in combat. Now it's our turn to protect him. We spent the evening mapping out a strategy. Marcus would collect all his documentation and prepare a sworn statement about Shadow's service and their last mission. Claire would coordinate with Watchdog to prepare for legal action if necessary. I would return to Riverdale and gather Shadow's medical records, adoption papers, and testimony from those who'd witnessed his rehabilitation. As night fell, Shadow maintained his vigil beside Marcus, occasionally resting his head on the man's knee in a gesture so trusting it brought a lump to my throat. Whatever trauma both had endured, their bond remained unbroken. I took the cabin's small guest room, leaving Marcus and Shadow to reconnect in the living room. Near midnight, unable to sleep, I crept out to check on them. Marcus was asleep on the couch, one hand resting on Shadow's back. The dog's eyes gleamed in the dying firelight, alert and watchful over his long-lost handler. The next morning, after a hearty breakfast and final planning, I prepared to leave. We'd decided it was safer for Marcus to remain hidden until we had assembled our evidence. If the military discovered he was alive and working with me, the pressure would intensify. As I loaded my truck, Marcus knelt beside Shadow, murmuring something in his ear. Then he looked up at me. "Take care of him. I'll be in touch through Claire's secure channels." "You should be the one taking him," I said impulsively. "He's your dog, Marcus. He always has been." Marcus shook his head. "They'll be watching you, but they're not looking for me, not yet. Shadow is safer with you for now." His voice softened. "Besides, you saved him when I couldn't. That creates a bond just as strong as what we had in combat." He pressed a small object into my hand, a worn metal tag identical to the one I'd found in Shadow's fur. "My handler tag. We always had matching ones. I want you to have it." I swallowed hard. "I'll bring him back to you when this is over. I promise." The drive back to Riverdale was tense, every passing military vehicle making my heart race. Shadow seemed different after reuniting with Marcus, more focused, somehow more himself. The final piece of his identity had clicked into place. He wasn't just a rescue dog or a former military asset. He was a partner, a protector, a witness to both heroism and betrayal. We arrived home to find Sheriff Winslow waiting in my driveway, his expression grave. "They're back, Jessica, with paperwork, lots of it. Let me guess, transfer orders, not retirement papers." Winslow nodded. "They're claiming he was reassigned to a specialized training program. Never formally retired. They have a court order." "Jessica?" "They're coming tomorrow at noon to take him." I clutched Marcus's tag in my pocket. "Then we have until noon to prove they're lying." What I didn't tell Winslow was that the military's return wasn't our only problem. On my kitchen table lay a plain white envelope that hadn't been there when we left inside. A single sheet of paper with 5 words that chilled me to the bone: "Stop digging, or you're next." I showed the threatening note to Sheriff Winslow, who frowned deeply as he examined it. "This crosses a line. Jessica, I'm posting a deputy outside your house tonight." "Is that really necessary?" I asked, though the charred remains of my barn, visible through the kitchen window, answered my own question. "Someone burned down your barn and is now threatening your life," Winslow said bluntly. "Yes, it's necessary." After Winslow left to arrange security, I called Ben and Jake, updating them on everything: my meeting with Marcus, Shadow's true history, and our midnight deadline. Both men arrived within the hour, grim determination on their faces. "I've been compiling Shadow's medical records," Ben said, spreading folders across my dining table. The evidence of neglect and probable abuse is undeniable. Malnutrition, improperly healed fractures, signs of prolonged stress. No legitimate military handler would allow a working dog to deteriorate to this condition. Jake paced the small room, military precision in his movements. I've spoken with 3 former handlers from Shadow's unit. They all confirm that Marcus Cooper filed retirement paperwork for Delta 7 before their last deployment standard procedure for a dog approaching 8 years of service with multiple combat tours. Then why can't we find those records? I asked in frustration. Because someone deliberately removed them, Jake replied. The question is, do we go public with what we know, or try to fight this through official channels? Both. I decided, Ben, contact Dr. Harriet Mitchell at State University. She's an expert on military working dogs. She can verify Shadow's condition and training. Jake, reach out to your media contacts, but don't release anything yet. We need leverage. As the men set to work, I knelt beside Shadow, who had been watching our activity with alert interest. We're not giving up on you, buddy. Not now. Not ever. In response, he pressed his muzzle against my hand, a gesture of trust that nearly broke my heart. Around sunset, a familiar truck pulled into my driveway. Ethan Bradley stepped out, followed by Emily. The sight of them still surprised me. Our relationship had transformed so completely since the flood. Heard the military's coming for Shadow tomorrow, Ethan said without preamble when I opened the door. Emily wanted to see him. The little girl rushed past me to Shadow, who greeted her with gentle enthusiasm. You can't let them take him, she declared, looking up at me with fierce determination. He's a hero. We're doing everything we can, I assured her. Ethan cleared his throat. That's actually why I'm here. There's something you should know. He handed me a business card. 3 days after the flood, this fella came by my farm asking questions about you and the dog. Said he was from some veterans support organization. But something felt off. The card bore the logo of an organization I'd never heard of, American Veterans Alliance. A quick internet search on my phone revealed nothing but a bare-bones website that had been created less than a month ago. He was particularly interested in whether you'd been asking questions about Shadow's military background. Ethan continued, I didn't tell him anything, figured it wasn't my business, but after I heard about your barn... He trailed off, his implication clear. Did you get his name? Wilson? Thomas Wilson, driving a black SUV with Virginia plates. Ethan's weathered face creased with concern. Look, I know we had our differences, but what you and Shadow did for Emily, I don't forget something like that, whatever you're mixed up in. Be careful. After they left, I shared this new information with Ben and Jake. The latter's expression darkened as he examined the business card. This outfit isn't legitimate, probably a cover for whoever's monitoring your activities. He pulled out his phone. I've got a buddy in Virginia DMV. Might be able to trace those plates. As night fell, the deputy Winslow had promised arrived a young officer named Rodriguez, who positioned herself discreetly in a patrol car at the end of my driveway. Her presence was reassuring, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were running out of time. Around 10 o'clock, my phone rang Claire Bennett, using the secure line we'd established. Jessica, Marcus is gone, she said, her voice tight with panic. I went to check on him after dinner, and the cabin was empty. His truck is still here, but he's vanished. The place was torn apart. Someone searched it thoroughly. My blood ran cold. Did they find his documentation? No. Marcus kept everything important in a waterproof case buried under the woodpile. That's still there. but they took his laptop and phone. Claire, you need to get somewhere safe right now. Don't go back to your home. Already ahead of you. I'm at a friend's place, using her phone. What should I do with Marcus's evidence? I thought quickly. There's a 24-hour FedEx in Asheville. Send it overnight to Ben Williams at Riverdale Animal Clinic. Not to my address. Then disappear for a while. What about Marcus? The question hung between us, heavy with implication. If whoever was behind this had taken Marcus, we'll find him, I promised, with more confidence than I felt. But first, we need to secure Shadow and that evidence. Sleep was impossible that night. Shadow and I kept vigil in the living room, his body pressed against my leg as I methodically organized what evidence we had. Around 3 a.m, Jake called with news. The SUV is registered to Cerberus Security Solutions, the same contractor Marcus mentioned. They're a private military company with government contracts for specialized training programs. Very black box stuff. So they're definitely involved, I confirmed grimly. Up to their necks. And Jessica, they've got serious reach. If they took Marcus. He didn't need to finish the thought. We both knew what it meant. Dawn brought a flurry of activity. Ben arrived with Dr. Mitchell, the academic expert who'd agreed to examine Shadow. She spent an hour with him, documenting every scar, every behavioral response, every command he recognized. This dog received elite military training, she confirmed when finished. The muscle memory is unmistakable. And these injuries, she pointed to her notes, particularly the healed fracture in his hind leg, show signs of improper treatment consistent with field injuries, not training accidents. Could you testify to that, I asked. Absolutely. It would be my professional opinion that this dog served in combat, sustained injuries consistent with his handler's account, and subsequently received inadequate medical care before being improperly discharged from service. It was a start, but without Marcus's first-hand testimony, it might not be enough. At 11 o'clock, 1 hour before the military was due to arrive, a FedEx truck pulled up outside. The package from Claire contained everything we needed: Shadow's original service record, Marcus's mission logs, and most crucially, a copy of Shadow's retirement papers, signed and dated before their final deployment. This proves they lied, Ben said, examining the documents. The question is, will it be enough to stop them today? We were about to find out. At precisely noon, 3 vehicles pulled into my driveway: a military police vehicle, a standard Army transport, and a black SUV that sent a chill down my spine. The one Ethan had described. Lieutenant Harrington emerged from the first vehicle, accompanied by 2 military policemen. From the SUV stepped a civilian in an expensive suit, slick, confident, with the hard eyes of someone used to getting his way. Thomas Wilson, Jake muttered beside me. Cerberus Security. I stepped onto my porch, Shadow at my heel. As the men approached, Deputy Rodriguez positioned herself beside me, hand resting casually near her sidearm. Ms. Taylor, Lieutenant Harrington began, we have orders to retrieve MWD Delta 7, as discussed previously. Before we proceed, I interrupted, I'd like to introduce Dr. Harriet Mitchell, Professor of Veterinary Medicine specializing in military working dogs. She's prepared an affidavit regarding Shadow's condition and training history. Wilson stepped forward. Lieutenant, this is unnecessary. We have a court order. Actually, I continued, unruffled, I have documentation proving that MWD Delta 7 was officially retired before his last deployment. Documentation that somehow disappeared from military records. I held up the papers from Marcus's file. Harrington frowned, clearly uncomfortable. Those could be forgeries." "They're not," came a voice from behind us. Every head turned. Sheriff Winslow was walking up my driveway, and beside him, thin, pale, but very much alive, was Marcus Cooper. Shadow's reaction was immediate. He bounded off the porch with a joyful bark, nearly knocking Marcus over in his enthusiasm. The reunion drew all eyes, momentarily distracting from the tension of the confrontation. Staff Sergeant Cooper, Lieutenant Harrington acknowledged stiffly. "We were informed you were unavailable." "I bet you were," Marcus replied, his voice steady despite his obvious exhaustion. "Just like you were informed that Delta was killed in action. Seems there's been a lot of misinformation circulating about us." Wilson's face had gone carefully blank. "Sergeant Cooper, I believe we should discuss this privately." "Nothing to discuss," Marcus said flatly. "I filed retirement paperwork for Delta before our last deployment. After I was wounded, someone altered those records and transferred him to your custody without authorization. Then you abandoned him when he wouldn't comply with your enhanced training methods." The accusation hung in the air like a thundercloud. Lieutenant Harrington looked increasingly uncomfortable, glancing between Wilson and his orders. "Lieutenant," I said quietly, "you have a choice to make right now. This can become a public scandal involving illegal appropriation of military assets, falsification of records, and animal cruelty, or you can acknowledge that a mistake was made and allow Shadow to remain with his rightful handler." Winslow stepped forward. "I should mention that representatives from 3 news outlets are currently parked at the end of my driveway, waiting for my signal. Miss Taylor's story has generated considerable interest." It was a bluff, but a good one. Wilson's expression darkened as he assessed his options. "Lieutenant," he said finally, "I'll need to consult with my superiors. Perhaps we should postpone this retrieval pending further review." Harrington, clearly relieved to have an out, nodded quickly. "That seems prudent. Ms. Taylor, we'll be in touch regarding this matter." As they retreated to their vehicles, Marcus knelt beside Shadow, burying his face in the dog's fur. When he looked up at me, his eyes shone with unshed tears. "Thank you," he whispered, "for saving him, for saving us both." Shadow, sensing the shift in energy, pressed himself between us, connecting his past to his present, bridging the gap between 2 people who had fought separate battles to reach this moment. The war wasn't over. Wilson's retreat was tactical, not permanent, but today, at least, we had won a crucial battle. And for the first time since finding Shadow at that auction, I allowed myself to believe that sometimes, even in a world that discards its heroes, justice is possible. In the twilight of our lives, we're often forgotten just like Shadow was. This loyal German shepherd who risked everything serving our country ended up cast aside for a single dollar. His years of sacrifice deemed worthless once he was broken. How many of us understand that feeling? To give your best years to something greater than yourself, only to be discarded when you're no longer deemed useful. Shadow's story hits home because it reflects our deepest fears about aging in America, becoming invisible, being left behind, having our contributions forgotten. But his journey also reminds us of what truly matters, the connections we forge through loyalty and love. When Jessica Taylor reached out her hand to a trembling dog nobody wanted, she wasn't just saving Shadow, she was affirming that every life holds value beyond its productivity. That redemption is possible at any age, that our scars tell stories worth hearing, that family isn't always who you start with, but who fights for you when everyone else has walked away. Shadow's story beckons us to ask, Who are the forgotten heroes in our own communities? And more importantly, what are we going to do about it? I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.